the first scrimmage finally took place, Nick. It was the 8th one of camp, and the Gators got after it in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium for the first time. Jack Miller, Graham Mertz, that quarterback competition played out in the swamp. Both of those guys got first-team reps. The offense had some turnovers, so that's something definitely that we took away from the scrimmage. But what were some of the things that you heard through the grapevines as we were gathering intel after things wrapped up?
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably thought, this might be the scrimmage where Graham Mertz separates himself, where he takes the job. I don't think that has happened quite yet. I think we're still in a competition. And then the biggest thing for me is I think the defensive line is showing that it has some depth. Last year, Gravon Dexter played 60-plus snaps against Utah as a defensive tackle. Yep. He had the third most snaps of any defensive player. Your defensive tackle shouldn't have more snaps than one of your starting safeties. That just shows the lack of depth that Florida had and how much they were putting on Dexter. This year, I think with Cam Jackson, Chris McClellan, Desmond Watson, Banks, like the guys you have now, I think you'll be able to have a nice rotation and keep guys fresh. And you're not going to ask, Cam Jackson to play 600 snaps this year. Keep guys fresh. And I think the depth on the defensive line, for me, is going to be a huge thing for Florida and something they didn't have specifically on the interior last year.
And we got to hear from Billy Napier and obviously guarded with some things that he said, but he did single out some players and he did reveal some of his takeaways about where he felt like the team performed. And the typical, there was some good, there was some bad, and there was some ugly. Now, there was some good now, and I think it's important that we start with that. I think the first kind of highlight that came out of the scrimmage that came out from Gators football was the big touchdown pass from Max Brown to Aiden Mizell. And even though that's the third string offense that made that play, Nick, the Max Brown hype train just got some more juice off of that play.
Yeah, I mean, great play. And then in the very next tweet, they show him throwing an interception. So, you see what you want to see. I don't think that Max is I think it's a 2-quarterback race.
And let's talk about what we learned this week, Nick. I mean, trying to ask about where Max stands, and we heard from some program sources that said, "Hey, this guy's got talent. He's got the skill set to play here, or he wouldn't be at Florida." This is a guy that's learning the position. He's learning how to play quarterback. He's only done it for started 2 years in high school. Also a dual sport athlete. We know the time that he's put in with baseball. So, this is a guy that, again, would not be here if he didn't have the skill set, but he's still learning how to play quarterback. Jack Miller and Graham Mertz, they've learned how to play the position. Now they're just trying to learn how to play it well, and they're trying to learn how to execute the offense. Max is trying to learn how to play the position, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's going to be times in practice where he flashes and throws a deep ball or makes a great play with his athleticism. And that highlight might get out or some rumblings might get out, and you're going to hear fans, let's see Max. But there's a lot of other things that he's got to do to put himself in that position. And as you said, Nick, it is a 2-man race. And based on what we heard from the scrimmage, it's not been decided yet. But I don't think Graham Mertz was going to come in here and lock up the job with his first scrimmage in spring. That just wasn't going to happen. And let's be honest, this is still an offense that's a work in progress because where the offensive line is at, which we'll get into with Micah Mazuka. But let's talk about some more good that came out of the scrimmage. There was another injury that took place this past week with Keon Zipperer, unfortunately suffering a long-term knee injury that looks like it's going to put him out for all 2023. So with that, a big opportunity for Arlis Boardingham and Nick. He showed out in the scrimmage. Some other guys at the tight end spot made some plays. And, Xanders has been out, so this is an opportunity with Zip out now as well for those guys to step up. And I think Boardingham is going to have a role this season.
Yeah, spring football is not good to the Gator tight ends. You go back, a year ago, and Odom got hurt, and he's out again this year, and Elksness was hurt last spring. You got to put the tight ends in bubble wrap for spring camp. But it does give guys like Hayden Hanson a chance. The Florida tight end room is deep. You get Tony Livingston, who was supposed to be in the last class. He's a freshman this year.
Man, he looks great, Nick. We saw him walking across the field on pro day. That dude looks like an NFL prospect right now. I mean, he passes the look test.
He's a guy, though, kind of in that Max Brown vein where he's a basketball player, was probably more of a basketball player than a football player. Didn't know if he was going to be an offensive lineman or a tight end. He's a guy who's learning, I think, and still growing. I think the biggest guy that Florida will turn to is Arlis Boardingham, and his skill set gives you something that you didn't have last year with Griffin McDowell and Keon Zipper or Dante Zanders. I think Arlis Boardingham is more of your complete package. He's definitely put in the work to be a blocker and to be able to put his hand in the dirt and be trusted, in the running game. And then obviously his size, speed, his catching radius, his hands, he can be an offensive weapon for you. It's just about how much did you learn last year? Because you were injured so much last year. Did you kind of just check out because you were hurt, or were you taking those mental reps and was that redshirt year productive? And we'll see. We'll get the answer to that probably in the spring game and then, in fall camp.
Absolutely. And, another guy that made a big play at the receiver position in the scrimmage was Marcus Burke. He had a long, catch and run, made some other plays as well, one that set up a score. So it's good to see him and Mizell, some other guys in the mix now at receiver. Florida's running backs had a great day in the scrimmage, as you would expect. Looks like those guys are getting more involved in the passing game, Nick. And Cam Carroll, that hype train got a little going with his highlight that came out from the scrimmage. And you read it first at Gators Online, folks. Way back at the beginning of the month, we had in like a fourth or fifth practice report that Cam Carroll was going to be a factor based on what we had seen and some of the things that we had heard. And I think that he was able to show that in the first scrimmage. Florida's defensive line, just as a front, that whole front did really well. Cam Jackson is going to be a dude. And then Jason Marshall, as you reported, Nick, didn't allow a reception. He's, right now, really, I think the only spot in the secondary that's been solidified because there's some guys injured and banged up. There's some position battles happening. So, but Jason Marshall is, we heard it from Corey Raymond that he's really taken a step, and I think that he showed that in the first scrimmage.
Yeah, and cornerback's a spot that's pretty banged up right now. Every day, every practice report that we put out, we figure out who is in non-contact, who's playing, who's not. So cornerback's a place where there's been a bunch of opportunity, and I think Jalen Kimbers looked all right. I think the move with Jaden Hill inside, I'm not sure I love it. Maybe I like it. He's probably had some good days and some bad days, but it's a brand new position. You're covering a totally different type of receiver when you're in the nickel than when you're outside. So if you can get Jason Marshall to be, I think, he was very good his freshman year, and then we probably put an unrealistic expectation on him for his sophomore year, and then he didn't meet our unrealistic expectations. If he can just continue to progress and get better, he's a very good football player. And then Florida will need to find an answer across from him. And hopefully, in my mind, I think that's Devin Moore. But he's just been in non-contact and been dealing with
And we've seen Hill now also working that corner. He's kind of doing both with between stars. So I wouldn't rule out him maybe still starting there too.
Yeah, I mean, that's something you probably just to get him reps. If you are going to move him inside permanently, he needs the reps there because it's something he's never done. But if you're going to have a bunch of guys being injured, hey, Jadarius Perkins is a guy that can play there as well, and you can slide Hill outside. You need some versatility in your cornerback, in your defensive back room.
Now, that's the good that came out of the scrimmage.
Well, another one real quick is we don't talk about him a lot, so I wanted to bring it up. TJ Searcy is probably the last to be mentioned of the defensive linemen, edge linebackers that have come in. But he's looked really, really good. And I think the big thing for him, he's a little bit on the slighter side, is Mike Peterson is really getting on him about run blocking and setting the edge and being, a first and second down player, not just a third down player. So I think TJ Searcy had a sack or two in the scrimmage, and he's a player to look at. We talk about Will Norman all the time and Kelby Collins, but I think TJ Searcy is quietly having a really nice spring.
And it's going to be easier for him to play early as an edge player versus those guys and playing right up on the line. But there's been several freshmen that have made an immediate impact this spring, and I think have earned some playing time for the fall. So now one guy that I think we also need to mention in terms of that good category is Shamar James. He was a bright spot on Tuesday, and he's had a really strong spring, showing that he's going to be one of the guys there. But it's unfortunate as we kind of get to the bad that came from the scrimmage that the Gators have been without Terada Mitchell and Derek Wingo. Wingo hasn't played at all. Mitchell's been limited and been a non-contact. And those are the two guys that are going to be making the calls and audibles on defense. And obviously James is doing it too. And Scooby Williams has been getting that opportunity at inside linebacker. Remember, he was supposed to move and start this spring at edge. And I think just out of necessity because of the injuries, he's now been playing inside. You also got Jaden Robinson, a true freshman that's getting some reps with the second team defense at inside linebacker. But because of those moving parts and some of those injuries, it was a little bit of a mixed bag for Austin Armstrong's unit in the scrimmage. According to Billy Napier, he says that they were kind of up and down, hot and cold. They had really good times where they obviously forced some turnovers, which we'll get into, but other times where they struggled. And, he credited or attributed it to the fact that they're playing all these different combinations of players and they're having to deal with these injuries. And he's having to remind his coaches, hey, this is part of the growing pains and part of what you go through in spring. Once we get to the season, there's only 11 guys that got to get on the field. But this defense obviously is still a work in progress. You lost 13 of 22 starters and some key guys on defense, both of your inside linebackers, both of your starting safeties, your defensive tackles. So when you have the guys that are out, Miguel Mitchell's another one that are supposed to replace those guys, it's going to have an impact when you have a scrimmage.
Yeah, and I think Terada Mitchell is probably just limiting his reps. He's a guy who had a bunch of injuries throughout his 4-year career. He's already proven that he knows the defense. He came right in and practice 1 of spring was making the calls and checks at the line. And he's someone, hey, if he's been a little banged up in 2022, something nagging starts to happen. Hey, you've already shown us the defense. Take some mental reps on the sideline. We don't need you to, lose you for the entire season in spring.
Sure.
And I think there's other guys, Jaden Robinson. I remember like when Antonio Morrison came in and he was an early enrollee and they just threw him behind somebody. Hey, follow him and go learn because you're going to have to play. And I think the same thing happened with Jared Davis and Alex Anzalone. So Jaden Robinson getting those second team reps. It's, hey, sit right behind Terada in practice, see how he makes these calls. We're going to need you to do that. Maybe not next year, but soon. So I really like Jaden Robinson as a prospect. I think I've seen him a little bit suspect in times in passing, trying to cover tight ends and stuff, which looks familiar from what we've seen. But he's an old school type of middle linebacker who wants to put his forehead in your chest and play football, which I can appreciate. So I'm feeling a little bit better, I think, about that interior linebacker spot than I was heading into spring.
Now, one last thing on this scrimmage, and then Nick and I will kind of get into what we've learned at this point in the spring. But, we'll get more into the offensive line in that segment. But just the fact that they've had the injuries and where they're at now, I just don't think that it's been great that they've gotten some opportunities for the young offensive linemen. But because you were losing 4 of your 5 starters up front, to me, it was so key for the guys that are going to be your starting 5 to get practice after practice out there together, gelling as a unit, and they have not been able to do that because of injuries. Again, it's presented opportunities for other guys, and we've learned some things about who's lining up where and where they're repping guys, but I just think that the fact that Mazuka's out, Cam Waits is out, Jalen Farmer's out. That's not what you want because I think all 3 of those guys would probably be starting along with Richie Leonard. So we'll get more into that. The last thing from the scrimmage that was really the ugly was the turnovers, obviously. Even though I think Anthony Richardson's interceptions were put under a microscope last year. The Gators actually did really well with turnover margin in Napier's first season. They ranked number 2 in the SEC and 17th nationally at 0.62 per game. The offense only lost 14 total turnovers. That ranked second for fewest in the SEC. So they did a pretty good job taking care of the ball, especially Anthony Richardson during the second half of the season. So to hear Billy say they turned the ball over a handful of times in the first scrimmage is, that's not what you want. And that's something that's going to have to get cleaned up. And we heard from Graham Mertz last Saturday, Nick. He's battled turnover issues throughout his, Wisconsin career, but he did improve them last year. He went from 10 touchdowns and 11 picks in 2021 to 19 touchdowns and 10 interceptions this past season. So improvement there, but he said, it's still got to be lower. Yeah,
it's still double digits. He had a double-double last year.
He said that's got to improve, but again, that's something I think that to take away from that first scrimmage, the fact that there were multiple turnovers is that's something they got to clean up.
Yeah. You don't need your quarterback putting up double doubles. You'd like to see those interceptions in single digits. You want
a double in the touchdown category.
Yeah, just a double single, maybe a double zero. Double zero would be awesome, but you'll take a double single. That's something that's going to be interesting to me. And I've said it before. I think Graham Mertz said to us he prides himself on his accuracy. His accuracy. His completion percentage, at least, went down every year he was at Wisconsin. So I think people, when he came, they were immediately like, oh, thank God, someone who's going to throw a slant, not like Anthony. And I'm like, listen, Anthony did a lot of really good things that the offense needed to him to do to be successful. And Graham has shown in the past that he's turnover prone, and Florida had those turnover issues again. And you're going to be playing a lot better defenses every Saturday in the SEC with a lot faster people. No disrespect to Rutgers in Maryland. I don't think they have SEC defenses at those two institutions. So it's going to be, if Graham Mertz does win the job, turnovers are going to be a huge thing. And I think if Florida can get the offensive line right, and then like you said, I think Micah Mazuka is a starter. I think Cam Waits has the potential to be a starter. These guys aren't even around right now.
Yeah.
Florida's going to go up to its identity. Graham Mertz is going to be a game manager that exists between the center and the running back, and then hits enough passes to keep defenses honest. I don't think that Graham Mertz wins you a lot of football games. Like Anthony Richardson won the Utah game. I don't think Graham Mertz wins you a bunch of games, but I don't think he's going to do a lot of things that will lose you games. The 3 interception games or fumbles that Anthony Richardson had, that the Kentucky game where you think he put too much on his shoulders. So I think Graham Mertz is kind of a manager, but you have to get all the pieces around him healthy and right so that he can manage it. You can't. You need everyone showing up to their shift for the manager to put people into different aisles. You can't have 8 people not showing up to work and then blame it on the manager.